Welcome to Beyond Words Presents. My name is Whitney Diffenderfer, and I'm here as your host one more time. And today, I'm so excited to be here with Hannah Papp. She is a soul coach. She's a traveler. She is the author of our newest upcoming book, Mystical Backpacker. Hannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Hannah, what is the difference between regular backpacking and mystical backpacking? Because, regular backpacking's, you throw a backpack on and you go out and travel, right?
Sure. That's a great question. I think when you think of backpackers, you think of a lot of high school students or college students or kids who are taking a leap year from school, and they're basically just going out to explore some part of the world, whether they go off to an ashram in India or to somewhere in Israel or just looking around the world. Really what happens with a mystical backpacker can be any age group, and a mystical backpacker is someone who's traveling alone and not according to an itinerary. They're less a tourist and more a traveler. When you think of the kind of romanticized travelers that we have in fiction and that we appreciate on television shows or in literature, essentially those travelers go where the wind takes them.
Yeah. So there was one particular journey that I took when I was living in France, where I went down to the southwest France region. And I was thinking about it as I was preparing for our interview today. I'm like, that was totally a mystical backpacking journey. And yet I planned out where I was going to go the whole time, because I have this, and I'm sure lots of people out there have it, but it's like I need to know where I'm going. I didn't book any hotels. I didn't look up anything that I was going to do, but I had in my head, okay, this is generally where I'm going to go, and I did follow it. So what advice would you give to people who are just like me, like, I need to know where I'm going and very attached to that?
Well, I think I'm like you in that regard as well. I would say that I'm naturally a type A personality rather than a type B personality. So I also like to feel that I'm somehow in control of my journey and know where I'm going. When I went mystical backpacking, what I did was I had a very good idea of the first place I was going, and I had some ideas for the second and third places that I might go, but I allowed for happenstance to take me off that path. And so in fact, I was several times during my odyssey, I rerouted according to a whim. For example, I was supposed to go to Nice, and I actually just decided in the instant that the train pulled into the station at Nice, I thought, you know what, I'm not feeling it, and I stayed on the train, and I ended up only getting off at Barcelona. So in that way, it was a completely accidental destination.
Wow. So when you do things like that, so you arrive in Barcelona. It's not some place that you've ever done any research on. It seems like absolutely no plans on going to Barcelona. How do you find out about where you are? How do you not just, even my heart is like it's starting to race and getting tense, because I mean, unless you know Spanish, unless you're familiar with the city, it seems like there would be a lot of things that would potentially get in your way of just finding a place to sleep for the night.
Sure. Well, and when I arrived in Barcelona, it was already dark out, but I had with me, I mean, I knew I was going to certain parts of Europe, and so I had, this is pre everybody having internet easily accessible on their cell phones days, and so I had, I can't remember if it was Europe on a shoestring or something like this with me in my books, in my bag, so I was able to look that up and have an idea of where I was going. And they'll tell you the metro stop, and once you get off the train, you use a map, real old school. I think this sort of era that we live in now is more conducive to organic travel and not having those feelings of helplessness and not having those feelings of
fear.
Fear, for lack of a better word, because you can just look this stuff up on your phone, and we're in the information age. You can find it easily.
So being in the information age and knowing that we're constantly connected to everything, one of the things I love about your book is that you talk about the mystical, the spiritual side of things. And there's a lot of discussion about how being so connected is removing us from that world. So what are even just a couple of things that as we travel, as we go backpacking, what is it that we can do to bring that mysticism, that spirituality into our journey?
That's an excellent question. I think perhaps because of the times we live in a time that is more challenging than at any time in history to connect with one's personal truth and also to connect with one's personal spirituality. Because we live in a world where there's just this cacophony of voices constantly streaming at us. And even when we're watching a visual image, there's a ticker tape telling us a completely different thought in the lower third of the screen. And so I would say that the best advice I could give mystical backpackers is to disconnect from all of that. It's not just about disconnecting from your job or your routines or your community at home, but rather it's also about disconnecting from the conversation and engaging in that conversation within.
Mm. And you encourage people to keep a journal. What is for people who don't journal normally? What are some techniques? What would you recommend that they do, and how often?
Well, I'm a writer, so my answer is always going to be more is more. But I think even if you're not a writer, if you have, handwriting that looks like you're a serial killer, if you can't spell to save your life, you shouldn't allow that to hinder you, because this journal is for you and you alone. You're not trying to publish it as a book. What's amazing about journaling is that a lot of times our limiting beliefs can be sourced within its pages. We are used to thinking a certain way. And so a lot of times it's not obvious to us, hey, I'm thinking this way, and this is actually a choice. But when you read it in a journal and you read your entries over and over and over again, and you see that you're constantly bringing up the same theme. So just to pick one out of the air, let's say it's worries about security. A lot of people obsess about money. Will I have enough? Should I buy this? I feel guilty. I spent too much on dinner. Well, when you see this consistently coming up in a journal, you begin to recognize that, okay, even though maybe on April 29th you had a legitimate concern about having spent too much money on dinner, the reality is that this is part of your belief system. Your belief system is that you're not going to have enough money. And that really shows in a journal. The other thing is, and this really helps with the mystical aspect of the journey, is that in fact, when mystical things happen to you, let's say something that you would mark down as a coincidence, or something that you would document as a happy occurrence, as you begin to fill these into the pages of your journal, you'll see that it's happening more and more and more as you journey.
That's amazing. I'm still thinking of the journey that I took to Southwest France and all of the things that I discovered while I was there. And I remember climbing a mountain, well, not a mountain, a big hill, and just randomly meeting these construction workers. And I was actually in Andorra at the time. And strangely enough, in Andorra, they don't speak French or Spanish, even though it's sandwiched right between those two countries. And I remember having a conversation with these two construction workers, not understanding a single word they said, and them not understanding a single word I said. And I took a picture with them and had so much fun. And it's one of my favorite memories from that trip. But just to stop and think of it as that kind of mystical moment is, it gives it more significance, not in the heavy way, but more significance than it would have had otherwise.
Well, it's a special moment that perhaps wouldn't have happened if you had been traveling with other people. And I think the amazing opportunity of traveling by yourself is that you're ejected from your comfort zone in a way that your daily life never demands of you. And in fact, almost all the places that I traveled to, I didn't speak the language. But I would always learn immediately when I entered the country how to greet someone, how to ask them how they were, and how to say thank you, and how to say please. And it's remarkable that if you just put that small effort in, and who knows if your pronunciation is correct, when someone tries to speak another person's language, the conversation begins regardless of whether you have the words or not. And just as you said, gestures, sentiment, so much can be expressed in other senses that you start to realize how there are so many other skills that you have for communicating and connecting with others.
Yeah, I love the idea. We always there's another book that's coming out in a couple of weeks that we talk about how to disconnect from the technology and all of that stuff in order to connect with the people who are right there in front of you. And it's exactly what you're saying as well. And in the case of being traveling, it's one of the most important things too. Have you had experiences as you were backpacking where somebody that you met shot you off on a different route than you had anticipated?
Sure. Actually, one of the ones I talk about in the book is one of the most incredible memories of my life so far, I would say. I had met a fellow traveler in a hostel, and we decided we were both leaving town right around the same time, and she mentioned to me that she had to go get her train ticket, and I said, oh, I'll go too, and I'll get mine at the same time. So we get there, and there's this epic lineup. So we're standing in the line, and as we are, we're chatting, and she was meant to go to Ireland, and I was meant to go to Paris. And at the time it was February, so we were talking about going much further north into much worse weather, gray skies. And by the time we were maybe fourth from the ticket window, I turned to her and I said, hey, want to go to Mallorca instead? And for those of you who don't know, Mallorca is an island, a Spanish island in the Mediterranean. And it's, absolutely beautiful, palm trees, bougainvillea, really old stone cities, mountains, lots of hiking, and of course beautiful blue sea views anywhere you are on the island. And she turned and looked at me and said, absolutely. And 4 hours later, we were on a ferry to Mallorca.
Oh, that's incredible. And did you guys have a good time? Was it as beautiful as you had hoped?
It was fantastic. In fact, not only did we end up staying there and traveling, we ended up making lots of friends. And really the second part of my mystical backpacking journey was we stayed there on the island, and we got jobs, and we worked to fund the next leg of our travels.
Okay, so you kind of hinted at it, and I just would love to hear it from you and also share it with everybody who's watching. What was your first mystical backpacking journey? Because you've talked about working a little bit, and you've talked about all the different places that you've been. So how did that come to be, and what did it look like?
Sure. Well, I think when you first start to travel, you do it in safety. You would do it in this sense, perhaps a false sense of security, but your parents will take you in the car on a family trip, or you'll come to that age where they think it's worth money to spend on a big expensive flight and take you someplace, farther away. And certainly I had done that. I had gone to Europe to attend graduate school and earn my master's degree abroad at an American accredited university. With the school and with friends there, I had traveled to other destinations in Europe. So I had certainly become more comfortable as a traveler, and certainly more comfortable traveling to countries where I didn't speak the language or I didn't know people. But the journey that I document in the book is the very first experience I had of being a mystical backpacker. And in fact, one of the things I talk about in the book is that it's really, you only need to do it once to have that stay with you forever. And the themes that you connect with through the mystical backpacking experience, once you've connected with those themes, you don't need to connect with them again and again, because they're your inner truth. So although your inner truth evolves and grows with time, it doesn't actually change completely. So the journey that I talk about in the book is actually my first mystical backpacking experience.
And how long were you gone?
I was gone, I would say, in terms of active traveling, I was gone probably somewhere between 5 and 7 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot longer than most people would think or would even conceive of.
Yeah. And in terms of just by myself negotiating planes, trains, automobiles, hiking, finding hostels, relocating, I would say that that was probably closer to 7 weeks because you stop at places as well.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds amazing. And were you mainly in Europe for that?
I was. So I had, paid the big ticket price of getting over to Europe, and then it was much more. I tell people who say, well, I can't do that because I can't afford it. I always tell people, you know what? When I was a mystical backpacker, that's the poorest I've ever been in my life.
Mm.
I was a student, and it was the only time that I was a student that I wasn't actually working at the same time. So I had really limited budgets, and I traveled lightly.
Well, and as you say, it's like you paid the big money to go over to Europe, but it seems like mystical backpacking is something that you could do. You could just walk out your front door and, grab a bus to wherever or grab the train to wherever. You don't necessarily have to hop on a plane anywhere.
That's also true. I think it definitely depends on your comfort level, obviously your budget, but also if you're someone who has never left your hometown, then that's definitely going to be a route for you to take.
Mm.
I do believe, however, that it is important to remove yourself from your comfort zone because conflict, discomfort, these are things that cause growth. And a lot of times when we're stagnating in our life, it's because we've set up parameters within which we don't grow anymore. We're not challenged by those parameters. So to remove yourself entirely from that situation is the most key element in the start of a mystical backpacking experience.
Mm. Is there a way that you can kind of start to tease out those parameters? Because so many of us, we're so settled in them that we don't even really see them for ourselves anymore.
Well, yes. I mean, every chapter of the book has exercises that help you, if you work through them, will help you do just that. So it's not just a book that says, hey, check out this cool idea. It's called mystical backpacking. I did it. Now you try too. It actually takes you by the hand and shows you how.
Well, and just to show everybody, I'm so excited about it. You're so excited about it. It's just the most adorable book ever. This is Mystical Backpacker. It's not even on the shelves yet. It doesn't come out until next Tuesday, but it does come out next Tuesday. So we have our copies already. And you can go to www.beyondword.com/PAPP, P-A-P-P, and you can get a copy of the book for 35% off, and you'll have it on launch day. So be sure to go run and get that. And as Hannah did just say, it has exercises in here to lead you through your mystical journey, as well as just the backpacking side of things, because that is something that many of us are not super familiar with. So you talk about even in here how to pack your backpack.
Yes, yes. And I also give some mystical extras. And those freebies include a video on how to pack your backpack.
I just watched that, and I was very proud to notice that some of the techniques that you use are ones that I've already learned and have been employing for many years. So it's great video. So
Oh,
make
that's
sure,
awesome.
and you can go to themysticalbackpacker.com to check those out.
Yes, yeah.
And we do have a viewer question. What was the biggest epiphany you had on your journey?
I would have to say I talk about mountaintop moments. And I call it mountaintop moments because I had mine when I was actually at the top of a mountain that I had just hiked. Um, but the idea was we respond so much to our lives. And I would say that 90% of our day-to-day living is action that's in response to something. So the bus is late. Now I have to decide, am I going to walk to work or wait for the next bus and really be late? Okay, so that's a response action. It's not really self-directed.
Hmm.
And I think because that becomes our comfort zone and we get so used to operating in that way, there's a time at which we just don't resist that anymore in any way. And that's really ultimately where the disconnect happens between living a life and living an authentic life. Because when you're living in your authenticity, you make choices for yourself and you take action for yourself that is self-directed rather than responsive. And so for my mountaintop moment, what I really realized, and it was an epiphany, was that I didn't have to live my life reactively. I could actually choose to create the life I wanted to live. And it didn't mean that it would be easy to achieve it or manifest it, but it certainly meant that I had a much better chance of actually realizing it because that's where my intention was flowing.
Absolutely. And that's such a wonderful thing for people to think about in every day. And as you were talking, one of the things that I realized, use the example of the bus, and one of the things that I realized is like even in the morning, you wake up at a certain time because you're expected to be at work at a certain time, which is totally reactionary.
Right.
And you leave work at a certain time because you're expected to be home for dinner at a certain time, or you just expect yourself to leave at that time for some reason. So it's again reactionary. And then I'm just thinking about how much of my life, same thing. It's like how much of anybody's life is just it's reactions to almost it's reactions to those parameters that we have set up for ourselves and aren't necessarily aware of.
Right. And it's also about sourcing joy because if you love what you do, then it's easy to get out of bed early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
You know? But if you hate your job, or if you know you're going to have to go into a meeting with someone that you don't like, or if you know, let's say you're not even at work. Let's say if you know that this is the day that you all agreed to clean out the garage. That might be a day that it's harder to get out of bed because you see the drudgery of the day ahead.
Hmm.
When you connect with what drives you and actually manifest it in your day-to-day life, you have those days less and less. And you have
Hmm.
more and more the experience of waking up and being really happy to get out of bed and excited about what the day holds.
Hmm. So I love the subtitle of your book. The subtitle is How to Discover Your Destiny in the Modern World. And the juxtaposition of those two things are so interesting because destiny to me, I automatically think fairy tales and these nice stories that you're told when you're a small child, but destiny, yeah, whatever. And then of course the modern day world. And so what do you mean by destiny? How do you go about even beginning to find that?
Sure. Well, I think if we look essentially at mainstream media and as you referenced, you know, the fairy tales and the stories of old, then we have this highly romanticized idea of destiny. And certainly I touch on that in the book as well because I talk about Odysseus and his great odyssey. But the reality is that no destiny is too small if it's your own. And so a shopkeeper living in Egypt may be having the happiest life ever. And it doesn't necessarily mean that he is celebrated by millions of people or rolling in dough. It just means that he is thriving within the life that he's created for himself. And certainly the inverse is also true. Just because, let's say, you're an investment banker on Wall Street and you have a multi-million-dollar apartment with views of the Manhattan skyline doesn't mean you're happy. And I think that's the part of the story that, you know, definitely American movies focus on, and that's sort of a more common experience within our cultural exchange, within our dialogue. But the truth is, your destiny is that which uplifts you, fulfills you, drives you, and within which you experience joy.
Hmm. And I know for a lot of people that is travel, and I know for a lot of people they view travel as something that only the rich people can do. And I just thinking back to what you said earlier about being able to travel on such a small budget, and you were the poorest you've ever been. And from what you've been sharing, it sounds like you were also just fulfilled, so crazily fulfilled in your journey that, there's no need to wait.
Right. Well, I've never been rich yet. I've traveled a lot. So you don't need to be rich to travel. Now, if you are a rigid person who will only travel if they can eat American spaghetti every Thursday night for dinner, or they will not sleep in a tent, or they will not sleep, if you're a no person, where you find lots of reasons to say no to life, no to experience, you're not going to have a lot of opportunities for travel. That's just regardless how much money you have. The book invites you to say yes. Expand your horizons, expand your comfort zones. Was I thrilled to be sleeping, in a sleeping bag rolled out on a concrete slab? No, but I was thrilled to be in Santorini, Greece, and that's where I slept in a sleeping bag on a concrete slab. So, I don't remember that night of uncomfortable sleep acutely. I just remember it in terms of sort of intellectually, oh yeah, I did that. But I do acutely remember, that volcanic island, those incredible villages perched on the mountaintops, the Arcacheri ruins that I went and saw, which is a village that's under archaeological excavation, and you see this village come to life before you that predates Christ and Christ's time. And I saw one of the most spectacular sunsets of my life from the west side of the island. So, do I care that I slept on a concrete slab? No.
Not at all. Yeah, and it's amazing to look and see for myself. And I invite everybody out there watching to do the same thing. It's like, what are those no's that automatically come up? Like, you talk about sleeping on a concrete slab, and I'm like, I don't sleep on the ground because I have a bad back and it'll just completely screw up everything. But, what is that limiting for me? Like, what is that making it impossible for me to do? And there's some people who are like, yeah, there's no way that I am not going to have a toilet.
Right.
And there are a lot of places that you just have to kind of deal without that.
Well, there are a lot of places that have completely reinvented what we would consider to be a toilet. You have to be open to that.
Absolutely.
And also, P.S., I think if you go to like a healthy back store or something, they'll tell you that the firmer the mattress, the better for your back. So maybe a concrete slab would be good.
Maybe it would be a good step for me. And so the big question too for me is like, so people they travel all the time. What is the difference between traveling and backpacking? Do you actually have to have a backpack? I've been wondering this forever. I don't know why, but I just have.
I think that's a fantastic question. I still do sort of little mystical backpacker refresher trips, and I confess that I go in my car and I take nicer luggage, and I've got nicer outfits and certainly less practical shoes. But ultimately, when you go on your major mystical backpacking odyssey, I think it's really important to be able to have your hands free. Because when you can have your hands free, you can stroll down a gorgeous boulevard with a coffee in your hand and everything on your back and really be carefree. But if you're traveling in a way where you constantly have to monitor your luggage, you're just going to miss out on opportunities. Now, I think what the book does is that it reinvents what backpacking is. Because I think that as a society, we've been trained to have this image in our mind of what a backpacker is, and that backpacker is like super granola. That's like the person wearing Birkenstocks and
hasn't showered in a couple of days.
Right.
Like,
I confess, I wear Birkenstocks, so you can just. But I think it also is really associated with wilderness travel. And that's awesome. If that's what resonates for your soul and you want to go to Yosemite or you want to, go see where the Klondike Gold Rush happened or do some kind of major outdoor experience, certainly you can. That's not excluded from this experience. But backpacking isn't just about going into the wilderness and sleeping, in a tent. It's really mystical backpacking is rather about going into more populated areas, cities, towns, villages, exploring the world at large. Go into the wild of the outer world, the wild of the world that occurs outside of your comfort zone. And what's amazing about that experience is that let's say you're on a beach in Thailand, okay? When you're sitting on a beach in Thailand looking out at other beachgoers, and the world is immediate and real and present in present time, and then you think about your coworkers sitting in their cubicles, or your mom driving your brother to soccer, or the other things that are going on in your real life regular world that are happening right at the same time, you start to understand how much agency you have to create a life outside of that parameter, because here they are right here on the beach in Thailand doing it.
So how do you integrate? I'm thinking about how it feels, and everybody knows this feeling. You're out, you're on vacation. To some extent, if you're on vacation, you have that feeling of agency for a lot of people. Some people don't, and then you come home and you go right back into your box. I just even had this visual just like being plunked right back down into your cubicle and just going back to the way life is. How do you recommend people integrate that agency, that freedom into their everyday life? Is there one thing that you could do every day to help?
I think that this book is really about experiencing a transformational experience. So it's less about going to Cabo for a week over Christmas holidays and more about a wild, adventurous inner journey that has highs and lows and is taking place in tandem with an outer journey. And the difference here too is that when you're traveling, let's say you go with your girlfriend. When you travel together as tourists, you're constantly in a negotiation. Where are we going to go today? Where should we eat for dinner? And you're constantly having to make compromises on your own driving desires. Maybe it's your first time in Paris and all you've ever wanted to see is the Mona Lisa live and in person. But your friend already went to the Louvre last year with her family and doesn't want to go there now. And then because you went together, you feel like it would be somehow unsociable for you to say, okay, well, you know what, let's spend the day apart, you go do what you want. Or there are a lot of people who just wouldn't be able to swallow that idea. As a mystical backpacker, you're going from location to location to location and ever constantly connecting with that which nourishes you and feeds you intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, artistically, creatively.
So what I'm hearing, so it just awakens a hunger in you, and it awakens the knowledge of what it feels like to have that kind of day-to-day, moment-to-moment fulfillment of your own destiny. And then when you come back home after your mystical backpacking journey, you're not the same person who left. And so you are coming from that place, coming from that exploratory place. And so there's no one exercise that any one person can do. They would find it themselves.
Right. Well, I would say that it satiates your hunger. And so because you start to feel so thrilled and satisfied by your life in response to this, what I call a modern day vision quest, okay? You are in a better place to have become familiar with that groove of living in your joy.
I'm like, I need to go on a mystical backpacking journey, like tomorrow. I don't know where, but I need to go do something. We
Well,
do have.
you know what that means? That means my work here is done.
Good job, and only in like 40 minutes too. That's impressive. We do have a couple of questions. One of them is, what's the biggest benefit of being a mystical backpacker? Slash, I think we just talked about it.
Yeah, we did kind of touch on it, but I would say that it's not limited to that, and that it's different on a person-to-person basis. It's a profoundly personal experience, especially because you're on your own. So,
Yeah, I'm just remembering how it felt to be traveling by myself, and even on my honeymoon, there were a couple of times that, and I am totally fine with this. I don't know where that confidence came from, but I'm totally fine with just dishing my brand new husband and going and wandering around by myself. Um, but I do know that, and that's, I mean, one of the questions that I wrote previously, because I was like this when I was much younger. But what is some advice you have for people who are really shy, but know that they need to do something to challenge themselves to break out of the norm?
sure. Um, I think everybody's a little bit shy. So everybody's on that scale somewhere. And definitely, when I'm in a place where I feel comfortable, I'm Miss Chatty Cathy. And then when I'm in a place where I feel uncomfortable, I'm silent as the night. So, it's a sliding scale. I would say to all mystical backpackers, basically seize your moment. If you feel that it's a day for sitting in quiet contemplation, sit in quiet contemplation. If you see someone, one of the things the book invites you to do is, if you see someone and you feel that connection, you know how sometimes you'll meet someone and you think, wow, I feel like I already know them. They're so familiar to me. Or you meet someone and you get along immediately right from the get-go. It's set your shyness aside for that instance where you gather the courage to go say hello to that person. Because those connections last a lifetime. The people I met when I was doing my original mystical backpacking odyssey are still in my life to this day. We've shared so much over the years.
That's amazing. Um, and I just realized we keep getting more viewer questions.
Hey.
What was the coolest thing you learned from someone you met along the way?
Well, cool, like really cool, is I learned how to ride a motorbike. So that's like super cool.
Yeah.
And actually, when I came back, I did end up getting a motorcycle license, so that's kind of cool. But I would say, in an intellectual way, I had really enjoyed university. I was one of those people who did not enjoy high school and loved college. And I think one of the things that I loved was the level that the conversations were at was so stimulating. And I love to think critically about the world around me. Now, I don't mean to criticize. I don't want to be a criticizing person, but I do want to challenge every piece of information that comes at me to find what resonates for me, what can I accept, and what can I let fall to the wayside. And what was incredible for me about my mystical backpacking odyssey was that suddenly all these places that I had identified with in my imagination and in my mind, and as a line on a page or an image, a black and white image in a book, suddenly was a tangible, tactile reality right in front of me. To be able to touch the wall of Gaudi's, Casa Mila in Barcelona, and to feel how smooth it is and how beautiful that curved line is, or to, ride over cobblestone streets and to feel the car that you're sitting in start to jostle about from each little individual cobblestone. These are things that bring those cerebral things into an actual physical experience. And I think that physical experience aspect of my journey was really what uplifted my soul.
Hmm. That's awesome. One more question. How can parents encourage their kids to explore what it is to be a mystical backpacker?
I think a lot of parents already let their kids go away for summer to Europe or summer to South America, or, there are a lot of parents who actually are very supportive about their children traveling. And I think that's an incredibly generous thing to do, not just financially, but actually emotionally, intellectually, and to give your children that opportunity to have that kind of an adventure. However, I do have to say that while I was mystical backpacking, I met plenty of people who weren't really um, making the most of this opportunity. If you're just going to go around from city to city and party and spend the whole summer inebriated and then go back and what have you learned and what did you see? Nothing. You saw like bars, you saw every English speaking pub. Every city has an expat pub where there are, English speaking people. Well, if that's what you're going to do, a pub tour of English speaking pubs around the world, I don't know that you're going to get the most from that experience. So for parents, I would say, be the judge, be the person who's discerning and say, is my kid going to get the most from this experience now, or is this something where I could help them do it after they finish college, after they've worked a year or two? Then I let them take a year or half a year to do something like this, and maybe then they'll be much better able to gain from it.
Mm. They won't just be looking for the bars and the parties, they'll be looking for the actual
Yeah.
learning that can come from it, or the really beautiful things that they can see.
Right. And hey, I'm not averse to a bar or a party. Read the book.
No.
Read the book.
Yes. Well, and just to mention it one more time, it's a beautiful little book, and there's so much in it, and I haven't had a chance to read it myself yet, but I know that as soon as I do, part of the reason I want to hold off on reading it is because I know that as soon as I'm done, I will be booking a ticket someplace. I just know that. So you can get it for 35% off at www.beyondword.com/PAPP, P-A-P-P. Again, it comes out next Tuesday, so you can grab that then. What is one thing that you would tell everybody who's about to go on their mystical backpacking journey that they should not be without? Or two things.
Well, I do think a backpack is important for the reason I said before, to keep your hands free.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely a journal. I know a lot of people want to just write their notes on a device, but there's something that really is mystical about using your own hand and a writing implement to document your experiences on paper, and to have a place where you can doodle or paste in a napkin or paste in a receipt from someplace that you went and just create this portal. That's essentially what you're doing. This journal becomes your portal. And years later, when this trip is physically well behind you, you just enter the pages of that book and you're just back there again.
Yeah, I kept a journal on my trip, and then I also sent a lot of postcards. And so when I got home, I didn't even remember what I wrote on the postcards. So I would go to my parents' fridge and I'd flip them over and read them and be like, oh yeah, I was there when I wrote this and da. And it's the moment when you re-find that journal too, like when you move.
Right.
And you're like, oh, this is that. And you sit down and you read and you're immediately transported.
Well, and also I think that, as you go through life, different phases of life hold different adventures. And some of those adventures happen closer to home and some of them are further afield. Mm. And some of them are less desirable, some of them are more desirable. But the reality is that there are many times in your life where you do reflect on where you are, where you've been, where you're going. And definitely, I think this journal will be an invaluable resource when those times come.
That's a great way to think about it. I want to go find my journal as soon as I get home. So this kind of belies my number one concern when traveling. How much budget-wise would you suggest people save up so that when they do travel, they can either worry less or not worry at all about finances?
Sure. I would say that whatever it is you think you need, because okay, someone who is going to India is going to need from here, from the United States, is going to need a lot more money than someone who's going to Idaho, for example. Okay, so there really is not a number that I can give you per se.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would say is whatever number it is you think you can do it on, add 30%. It's kind of like planning a wedding. That wiggle room. You know, you will find things like that bikini you must buy, or otherwise your soul is not fulfilled. You will find, you know, that one restaurant that you must eat at, even though there's absolutely nothing available on the menu for your $10 budget. So, you know, really, now, I have to say that when I was a mystical backpacker, I had a set amount of money and I didn't really have more. I did, however, have the opportunity to work for American companies and earn more money. So, you know, I supplemented. But that's also why my travels took so long, because I would get waylaid somewhere after I'd gone broke and have to earn some more money again.
Well, and so, and you mentioned this, it is the, you know, you find the bikini that you really want. You find like that little figurine that just reminds you so much of this little village that you happened through. I am a travel hoarder. I will definitely admit to that. I always want to buy things because to me, when I look at them, all of a sudden I'm transported, like a journal, I'm transported back to that place. Is that something that you recommend? I would imagine with a backpack, it would be kind of challenging to do that.
Well, it's funny because you can always mail things home to you.
True.
So if you can mail it home, you know, indulge once or twice. But I would say that if you actually check out my Pinterest board, so if you go to themysticalbackpacker.com and then click on our Pinterest link, there's a board about how to manifest your travel memories on the home front. And there are a lot of really affordable ways to create really beautiful things to put in your home, just out of things that were free or don't cost a lot of money. So like shadow box displays that will hold, you know, that ticket stub along with that photograph, along with that handwritten poem someone handed you, you know, that kind of thing.
So I can take out that box of receipts and random stuff that I gathered from our honeymoon and actually make it into something pretty.
Not just pretty, but also something that will transport you back to that happiness. Yes.
There's so many projects coming out of me talking with you. My goodness, I'm going to be busy for the rest of the month. So one of the things that I also, you know, is always the challenge is how do you decide where to go? How do you decide what's right for you? Or, you know, how do you decide? Are you going to take a plane? Are you going to stay close? Are you going to go to India? Are you going to go to Africa? Are you going to go to Europe? Like, how do you even start to decide that?
I think most people, if you talk to them about their yearnings or the things that they find an affinity towards, most people already have a place that they're really drawn to. Like, what if you're in Minneapolis and you go visit your friend's house and the whole thing is decorated like the inside of a Moroccan tent? You know, and this person's never been to Morocco. That might be a place that they're really compelled to go. So I would say the first thing is look within your life. You know, I had gone to a school of the arts for high school, for part of high school, as a visual artist. And I had had to study expressionism, post-expressionism, impressionism. And so the artists of that generation really inspired me and stimulated my soul, my wanderlust. So I naturally gravitated towards the places within which they worked. Mm. But I think we all have what's true for us.
I think looking around your house is probably a really good indicator because you can see it's like, is there a specific style that you gravitate toward, and where does that style come from? And
Right.
I just thinking about, like as you said, with your friend's house, maybe not so obvious as a Moroccan theme in everything, but looking around and seeing when you're drawn to a painting or you're drawn to a picture, what is that picture of?
Right. Right. And also the book helps you find places too. One of the exercises in the book is location, location. Where do you go?
And you actually put up a word find a little while ago, and you can go to either Hannah's, the Mystical Backpacker Facebook page, or you can go to the Beyond Words Facebook page, and there's a word find that you had with all sorts of different names of cities and countries hidden in it. And you just said the first three locations that you see is where your soul's really yearning to go. And I
Yeah.
believe I saw California, Sri Lanka, maybe, and I can't remember the third one. Peru.
Wow, that sounds like an awesome trip.
I know. Well, and I've always wanted to go to Machu Picchu, so that was dead on.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, we do have one more question from a viewer. It's where is it? It's hiding between the list. There's so many of them. Um, Oh, what lessons did you learn from nature?
Stillness. I think stillness isn't really a part of our modern life in modern times. It's not conducive to stillness.
Mm.
And since then, I've really had a meditation practice that's a part of my life. And it's amazing to be able to source that feeling of stillness back to my trip. I spent an enormous amount of time in nature. I saw many beautiful ancient ruins out in the natural world. I sailed across the Mediterranean Sea, which if you've ever taken a long journey by ship, this 3/4 of our world is covered with water, and yet how rarely we travel by water. But when you think historically, water travel used to be the only way to get around. So our entire experience of travel has changed. And to have that organic feeling of going over waves, to see sunrises and sunsets over water, to be in a storm at sea, these are really, you feel so small in nature, but also there's a real powerful effect on your soul, on your spirit, on your mind, where you do become really still, lulled by that experience.
Mm. And do you find that people can have the same? So you did mention there's different types of backpacking. There's the backpacking out into nature, and then there's mystical backpacking, which takes you out to populated areas where you connect with people. When you do go backpacking, do you find that you can also have somewhat of a mystical journey in that direction? Because that would be when you say mystical backpacking, I think a lot of people think you would be going in that direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I just want to kind of highlight this. It's not that backpacking in the wilderness isn't a vehicle for mystical backpacking. It is, and it can be. But it's that what I was saying was that when people hear the word backpacker, they often automatically default to the shot of a person hiking a trail through the piney woods of the mountains. And that's not necessarily what the intention of the experience is. It is about going into the wild, but we use the word wild more as a metaphor than as an instruction.
That's wonderful. Well, and so if there was one thing that you wish everybody did, whether they're on their mystical backpacking journey or if they're just traveling, what is something that you just wish everybody did when they traveled?
Take time to be alone. Take time to be alone. Take time to not be afraid of yourself. Take time to sit with your thoughts, which at first can be really alarming. You know, you might be a person who's busy with thoughts, and without having another person to distract you from them, they're overwhelming and unmanageable. But when you actually afford the time to be on your own, you can work through that stuff and really grow. It's an opportunity to transform into a version of yourself that's more self-satisfying, perhaps, than where you're at now. Even if you're a confident, well-adjusted, for the most part, happy person. This isn't all for Miss Misery Pants who hates her job and can't smile. It's for anybody, regardless of what your starting point is. The goal is to get to a happier place at the finishing line.
Thank you for that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we are at our hour, and I just want to let everybody know once again, and also just because I like to flash it because it's so pretty. Mystical Backpacker is available on our website. You will get it on launch day, which is next Tuesday. You can purchase it for 35% off, which is a great deal, at www.beyondword.com/PAPP, P-A-P-P. And also be sure to go to themysticalbackpacker.com and check out all of the amazing stuff that Hannah has up for you, because she's got videos, she's got exercises that you can use, you have your Pinterest page like you were talking about. There's just all sorts of wonderful resources that you've put together for people.
Thank you. And thank you, Whitney, for having me on the show. It was really fun being here. And I hope that everybody out there gets mystical.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. And I hope I'm going to get mystical. I'm going to get mystical. I'm going to go for a walk in the back there and start thinking about where I want to go. And so everybody knows, in 2 weeks we will have Kate Otto. She's actually the author I referred to earlier, who talks about disconnecting in order to reconnect with those who are standing right in front of you. Her book, Everyday Ambassador, comes out at the end of this month, and we'll be talking about how you can be the ambassador of anything that you're really passionate about in your life. So be sure to be here in 2 weeks at 1, which is our usual time, and we will see you then. Again, Hannah, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.